about differential reinforcement. So explaining about differential reinforcement with examples, especially during error correction or transfer trial. Yeah, that's a great question. I can give the example of like if we're teaching a student to ask for a cookie, let's say, and the student has the ability to make an approximation of the sound, but what we're working on is more spontaneous, better echoic control, things like that. So if I model cookie and the student repeats after me, and I know that they can do that, then I may give them like a little bit of a cookie, like just a, maybe a quarter of the cookie. And then the next time I want them to ask, I may, hold up the cookie and not give them that prompt. And then if they can say cookie, I give them the entire cookie. So I'm differentially reinforcing responses at a higher expectation. So when the expectations are a little bit lower, or the prompt's a little bit higher, they get a little bit less. And when the skill is more independent, they get a little bit more. So I think the same would apply for error correction and transfer trial. If they needed to be corrected, sometimes I may, if they are doing something for a toy and they're working really hard, but they needed a lot of correction, I may give them like, 5 seconds, take it back, try again. If they're then able to do it independently and more spontaneously, I'd give them much longer time with the toy.
Going into the error correction procedure, I started typing this out because it's easier to see it on paper. But basically, if you're going to give the SD of whatever it is, say for instance, it's even just like clap your hands. And then, the student doesn't clap, or the student errors and touches his head or something else, right? So the student errors. What do, right? You don't give reinforcement at that point in time. You may want to say something like, try this instead or whatever, but you're going to do correct, right? So you do correction, error correction, whether that's a physical prompt. I try and stay away from physical prompts if you can. I usually do like a model prompt if the student will follow that. Oh, no, this is clap your hands, right? So going into something like that. And then what I find is that as soon as, if the student does it then, so if I said, hey, clap your hands, and the student does this, and I say, no, this is clap your hands, and then the student claps their hands, what happens is that a lot of therapists will reinforce after this. I typically don't, and the reason I don't is think about it from a stimulus control perspective. You want the student to respond to clap your hands, not, oh no, it's like this. So if right here, take a look at this, right? So SD, clap your hands. Student doesn't do it, doesn't give reinforcement. But then you give a model prompt and the student does it at that point in time. So you model, the student claps hands. Then what do? If you were to reinforce right here, then what you're doing is you're giving reinforcement for a model, not for clap hands. So what I would do instead is I would say, don't, like, no reinforcement here, but immediately go on to a transfer trial. So immediately, I can't even type this fast, sorry. Immediately transfer trial. So go back to your original SD of clap hands. If you can, predict the error and maybe give them a slight prompt of some kind and reinforce that, right? So student claps hands. Does that make sense? But this reinforcement here, if I'm going to act it out because it's hard to type and act and talk at the same time, but if I said clap hands and the student errors, I'm not going to give reinforcement. I'm going to correct and say, this is clap hands. Student claps hands. I say, yeah, that's clap hands. Let's try it again. Clap hands. And I do something like this, and the student claps hands. I'm going to reinforce, but because I went like this, I might give a little reinforcement because I had to prompt a little bit. Then I might do something else. So it's called an expanded trial. I might go on and I might say something like touch your nose, right? Something the student is really confident with. And then I would go back to, let's try that again, clap your hands. And if the student claps on his own, that's when you give like a lot of reinforcement. Does that make sense? So that's kind of where your error correction, transfer trial, et cetera, comes in. I hope that helps.
Yeah, so you want to think about reinforcing or providing reinforcement after the responses you want to see more of. So if you're reinforcing a model or a gesture or a prompted response, then the reinforcement is going to be either not there or lower until you can get that response more independent. And then, the reinforcement is much better. Does that answer your question?